If you can give us a 5 countdown and then go ahead and start at your convenience.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The committee will come to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Since we are working in a fully remote format today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we proceed. First, if you're experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so it can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during a hearing in person. This is out of courtesy to all members on this committee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything you say. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand using the WebEx raise hand function, unmute your microphone, and ask to be recognized. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this roundtable, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses. This makes it easier for me to make sure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the conduct of this roundtable with members participating remotely? Seeing none, I now recognize myself for an opening statement. So good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today from around the country. Before I begin, I'd like to wish one of our great staffers on the task force, Andrea Goldstein, a very happy birthday. We wish you a very best on this day and every day throughout the year, and thank you for your dedication and service to our country, and particularly to this task force. Happy birthday. Today, I'm looking forward to our discussion on the work of VA's Advisory Committee on Women's Veterans. I'm disappointed that VA declined to attend on the grounds that the roundtable is publicly live streamed. The American people and our nation's veterans are owed transparency from federal agencies, regardless of the COVID surge throughout the country. This is the 21st public event and 11th and final roundtable of the Women's Veterans Task Force and the 116th Congress. Over the past 2 years, the 85 members of the bipartisan task force passed dozens of bills, NDA amendments, appropriations provisions, and the Deborah Sampson Act. The task force also visited 22 VA and DoD sites around the country. While I'm looking forward to when we can safely travel again, our work has not stopped. Every day we hear from our servicewomen, women veterans, advocates, and BSOs who inform the work of the task force. The VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans is one of those key partners. The Advisory Committee was established by Congress in 1983 in order to assess the needs of women veterans regarding equitable access to VA benefits and services, and in order to make recommendations for change. Every 2 years, the Advisory Committee submits a report to Congress. Over the past 3 decades, their recommendations have led to the elimination of barriers to care and benefits for women veterans. Previous recommendations were included as provisions in the Deborah Sampson Act and the Veterans Access to Child Care Act, which both passed the House this Congress. In addition to the significant policy tasks that lie ahead for the incoming Biden administration, and the next Congress, cultural change is an ongoing generational task. The advisory committee report highlighted that remaining facilities after women veterans would be that naming facilities after women veterans would be a symbolic move for inclusion and cultural change. Because Congress must rename facilities, I introduced a resolution, House Resolution 1213, now co-sponsored by 50 members of Congress, to take an inclusion approach to naming VA facilities. In preparation for this roundtable, the task force reviewed more than 20 years of public records on the work of the advisory committee. While VA has made both significant and incremental advances in equity over the years, two key themes emerged: access to gender-specific care and the need to support the women and men who are survivors of military sexual trauma. Last year, the Department of Defense estimated that more than 20,000 service members were sexually assaulted by fellow service members. 20,000 is only a fraction of these crimes that were actually reported, and only 138 resulted in a conviction at a minimum of requiring sex offender registration. That is less than 1%. Without accountability, survivors cannot trust the system, and sexual violence will continue with impunity. It must end. Military sexual trauma is not an occupational hazard. It is a fratricide. For decades, VA has picked up the pieces of the epidemic of sexual violence in the military. Thanks to the work of many of you on this panel today, VA has become a world-class provider of healthcare for MST and continues to conduct evidence-based research on the subject. In 2019, VA provided more than 1.6 million MST-related mental health encounters to more than 174,000 veterans. But this effort is still not enough. This committee will continue to work with VA to ensure MST survivors can heal and thrive. We must ensure that veterans are not re-victimized by the disability claims process or sexual harassment within VA facilities. Eliminating violent misogyny, particularly towards women of color, requires a diligent and consistent effort, and it requires leadership from the top. Women are the most visible service members when they serve in the military, and it is our job to ensure after they have served so bravely in our country that they are not invisible veterans. To the service women and women veterans who wonder if their voices will be heard, even when their own commanders try to silence them, we see you and we hear you. Today, we will hear from the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans, the Disabled American Veterans, Minority Veterans of America, and Paralyzed Veterans of America. I welcome you all, and I look forward to your testimony. And with that, I'd like to recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes for any opening remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. And I'll say the 3 most dangerous words any politician can say: I will be brief, but I will be. I'm grateful to be here today with the members of the Women's Veterans Task Force and our esteemed list of attendees from the Department of Veterans Affairs Advisory Committee on Women's Veterans and from the Veterans Service Organization community. Women are the fastest growing segment of our veteran population, and I was so proud of the work that the committee and the task force have done this Congress to bring greater attention to the service and to the action to take action to address their needs. VA has made progress with respect to improving services for women veterans, and that progress can be seen in the growing number of women who report high rates of trust and satisfaction with VA care. However, much work remains to ensure that the system and the benefits that await service members when they hang up their uniforms is fully welcoming, safe, responsive, and accessible to women veterans. The expertise and counsel that the Advisory Committee on Women's Veterans offer is critical to illuminating the path forward in that regard, and I appreciate the opportunity this afternoon to discuss their most recent report and recommendations in detail. While these are my final days in Congress, I know that today's conversation will help set the agenda for the committee and the task force in the 117th Congress. And I thank each and every one of our participants for being here today. And just a point of personal privilege. Julia, it's been a privilege for me to work with you and to see your enthusiasm that you've done and the work you've done with this task force and on the committee. And I certainly hope with the senior status that you have, that you'll continue to assist the chairman and the other newer members who come in who are not as versed as you are in these issues. So a heartfelt thanks to you and the great work and your friendship. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I appreciate that. And we are going to miss you sorely and your advocacy for our women veterans very, very much. So I'd like to also recognize the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Takano, for 5 minutes for any remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. And let me also just say how much I want to associate my remarks, associate myself with the remarks of Dr. Rowe regarding your enthusiasm and leadership and your expertise. And I consider it a wonderful thing that we have such continuity on the Veterans Affairs Committee, that we have members continuing, and your expertise and commitment has shined through, and certainly your leadership of this task force has been nothing short of spectacular. Dr. Rowe, my deepest gratitude for making Ms. Rice's bill on having the VA have a more inclusive motto a bipartisan effort. I cannot thank you enough, sir, for the culture shift that you got behind. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee, for convening this roundtable. When you have, while you've accomplished what you've accomplished as chair of the Women's Veterans Task Force, is nothing short of groundbreaking. The Women Veterans Task Force brought together 85 Democrats and Republicans across multiple committees to address equity for women veterans in access to health care benefits, economic opportunity, and other resources at VA and throughout the federal government. Not only did the task force introduce and pass dozens of bills, but we saw several become law. And just this past weekend, the president signed my bill, the Veterans Compact Act, into law, which included 2 provisions from Ms. Brownlee's landmark legislation, the Deborah Sampson Act. This Congress, the committee was focused on reducing veteran suicide, and that included specifically addressing the needs of women. VA statistics show that tragically, women veterans are twice as likely to die by suicide than women who have never served. Those numbers are significantly reduced when women veterans use VA care. For those tuning in today, if you or a veteran is in need of mental health support, you can call the Veterans Crisis Line at any time at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. Let me give that to you again, 1-800-273-8255 and press 1. As Ms. Brownlee highlighted in her opening statement, VA provides excellent care for women veterans, but many barriers still exist, including staff and space shortages and prevalence of sexual harassment at VA facilities. We will continue to address these issues at VA. And one of the most impressive accomplishments of the task force that I hope we will see more of in the 117th Congress is working across committees, particularly with our colleagues on the House Armed Services Committee. This year's NDAA includes a number of provisions championed by members of the task force to address equity for servicewomen and women veterans. A provision introduced by Ms. Spear and Ms. Brownlee will improve connectivity between the DoD and VA to ensure survivors of military sexual trauma have continuity and access to resources. And one of the key issues the task force revealed is how much work still needs to be done to address inequities across the veteran community, including for veterans of color and LGBTQ veterans. And this includes addressing undercurrents of white supremacy in this space. Ms. Church, in your written statement highlighted the many ways in which this is apparent, including the fact that the VA Medical Center in Richmond, Virginia, is named after a Confederate general. The Women's Veterans Task Force led the committee in ensuring that our work drew the full representation of the veteran community. And looking at the group that's gathered for today's roundtable, I'm glad to see so many familiar faces. I hope you will join us next year as we work with a new Congress and a Biden administration to add a renewed effort to supporting those who have borne the battle and their families, caregivers, and survivors. And I want to thank you all for your service to our nation and also for continuing to serve our nation's veterans. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Chairwoman Brownlee, once again, thank you for your magnificent leadership on the task force, and I'm looking forward to its next step, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm humbled by both you and Dr. Rowe and your comments. So thank you very, very much. So with that, let me introduce our witnesses from VA's Advisory Committee on Women Veterans. We have Command Master Chief Octavia Harris, U.S. Navy, retired, and she's chair of the Advisory Committee. She's accompanied by Colonel Betty Yarborough, U.S. Army, retired, vice chair and incoming chair. Lieutenant Colonel Shannon McLaughlin, Massachusetts National Guard, Vice Chair of the Benefits Subcommittee. Dr. Lisa Kirk, Lieutenant Colonel, Maryland Air National Guard, retired, Vice Chair of the Health Subcommittee. From the Veteran Service Organizations, Ms. Lindsay Church, Executive Director, Minority Veterans of America. Mrs. Maureen Elias, Associate Legislative Director, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and Ms. Joy Eam, National Legislative Director, Disabled American Veterans. All of today's witnesses served in our nation's armed forces. So I want to thank you all for wearing the uniform and your service to our country and your continued service on behalf of our nation's veterans. I will remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that the recording will capture all of your words, and please remember to do so when answering members' questions as well. So with that, I now recognize Master Chief Harris for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Brownlee, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and distinguished members of the Women's Task Force. Thank you for inviting the Advisory Committee for Women Veterans to participate in the roundtable discussion on the 2020 report of the Department of Veteran Affairs Advisory Committee on Women Veterans. Since the Advisory Committee was established, its mission has been to ensure access, care, and quality care benefits to all women veterans who have served honorably. Throughout the years, it has been challenging to achieve this goal consistently and equitably, in large part because women who have served and currently serve have not received recognition they deserve for that service. Women veterans currently make up 2.2 American women who all volunteered to serve her country, despite whether or not she would be accepted by her male counterparts. She volunteered despite being denied the opportunity to serve in all of the military jobs that her male counterparts were allowed to perform. And she did this because she wanted to prove that she could stand up and be proud to wear the cloth of this nation, even though there were no ships, buildings, or bases named after women. She also did not have the benefit of a history of women receiving accolades for their military service when the men had recognition from the very beginning of the Revolutionary War, and we know that women were there too. Interestingly, women still volunteer and serve for many of those same reasons today. But now, women veterans benefit from a fundamental change. That change is acknowledged by the men and women who served and currently serve here in Congress and who served in the military, that women veterans deserve the care, recognition, benefits, and access to all the same services as their male counterparts. The advisory committee takes very seriously that women veterans enjoy equal access to quality health care benefits and burial rights. It is in our congressional charter that we do this work, keeping in mind that the recommendations we make to the VA Secretary and Congress are realistic, actionable, and measurable, so that resources can be allocated to allow VA, the Center for Women Veterans, and the work of the committee can be achieved to the full intent and extent of that congressional charter. There are many areas that have improved over the years for women veterans, but there is so much more to do. Every woman veteran across the country needs to know, without a doubt, her country appreciates her service and will take care of her at any VA facility she walks into with the respect and dignity she has earned. We are the fastest growing population of veterans in the country. I am proud of that statement because that means young girls are realizing more and more that she can do anything she wants to do. I am immensely proud to see that many young women are choosing to serve. We also must reach back to the women veterans who have never been acknowledged as veterans because they were literally told they were not veterans, or they were told that the services they needed were not at the VA. The advisory committee believes that palliative care, rehabilitative care, and geriatric care have to be a focus as well. We are many and we are growing. The committee will continue to support the Secretary, Congress, in making the best recommendations as directed by our charter, guided by our hearts, and led by our own desire to ensure absolute best for our sisters in arms. In this statement, we are pleased to offer our views on the recommendations and activities of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans under consideration by the Women Veterans Task Force. Madam Chair, first, I want to thank the task force for the significant contribution it has made during the past 2 years to better understand the needs of women veterans, to improve VA programs and services on their behalf. The VA is making strides, but giving us an audience on a congressional platform means that many more strides and much more progress can be made. I also want to acknowledge and thank the members of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans who have accompanied me today. And as you mentioned, the incoming chair, Betty Yarborough, Colonel, USA, retired, and Dr. Lisa Burke, Lieutenant Colonel, Air National Guard, retired, Vice Chair of Health, and Shannon McLaughlin, Lieutenant Colonel, Staff Judge Advocate of Massachusetts, and the Vice Chair of Benefits. Without them and the other 8 members, the work and accomplishments to support women veterans, the Center for Women Veterans, and the VA could not get done. In addition, I want to thank the national level nonprofits and national veteran service offices that support women veterans every day across the country and actively advocate for policy and legislative changes that will further enhance the work of Veteran Affairs and the over 2 million women veterans. Without their leadership, involvement, and sustainment of advocating for women veterans, we would not have the strong voice we continue to have today. I am grateful to see them here today. In closing, the Advisory Committee for Women Veterans commends the VA for instituting various policy changes over the years for what I call progress improvement. And we also commend Congress for providing dedicated funding to enhance not only the care of women health services, VHA, and benefits, VBA, and burial, NCA rights to them and their families, We also commend congressional legislative changes over the years to pronounce the inclusion of women in the armed forces so every job is afforded to all who desire and qualify. I express again the pride of seeing more and more young girls and women who choose to serve her country because she sees women in the military who look like her have these opportunities so she can have them too. And once she becomes a veteran, she deserves to know, experience, and realize that her country is truly thankful for her honorable service, and the VA is ready to welcome her and take care of her and her family. Madam Chair, we commend the task force for being proactive from the very beginning of your inception and letting every level of government that is responsible for the well-being of women veterans know that you and the entire task force are determined to see that these matters are addressed promptly and at the appropriate level of action. I would also like to express our strongest possible support for enactment of the Deborah Sampson Act prior to the 116th Congress adjourning. We appreciate the task force hard work and diligence in ensuring that legislation to improve services for women veterans moves forward in this Congress and the next, culminating in the House passage of H.R. 3224. Madam Chair, this concludes my statement. I, along with the other committee members, are here to answer any questions regarding our 2020 recommendations to the Secretary and Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Master Chief Harris. And I want to thank you for your leadership on the committee. I apologize for that. I want to thank you for your leadership on the committee. I thank you for your heartfelt, honest, and refreshing testimony today. So thank you very, very much. So I now recognize Ms. Church for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. Chairwoman Brownlee, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and distinguished members of this task force. My name is Lindsay Church, Executive Director of Minority Veterans of America. Our organization serves thousands of minority veterans, nearly half of which are identify as women, and works to create belonging and advance equity and justice for minority veterans. I'd like to begin with a message of gratitude to the task force for this invitation and to the advisory committee for the work that they have done on behalf of the community to challenge the Department of Veterans Affairs to better serve women veterans. Many of these women are racial and ethnic minorities and identify as LGBTQ. MVA applauds your work fighting against the structural oppression women face when advocating for equitable service and care. MVA is grateful for the inclusion of women and minority women veteran communities in conversations that are taking place in this committee and in the site visits at the community levels. We have deep concerns that these conversations have been siloed and that VA leadership has been insulated from partaking in them, including the Secretary himself. This siloed mentality promotes a culture where women veterans are forced to assimilate to the archetypical veteran identity, that of a straight, white, cisgender Christian man. As this task force is aware, the veteran population has changed drastically since VA's inception. VA has thus far adopted a piecemeal strategy in changing to meet the needs of this demographical shift, which results in minority veterans universally being forced to assimilate to existing frameworks. Rather than continuing to force this assimilation, we recommend investing in an integrationalist approach that celebrates difference and creates nuanced solutions. Without an institutional change in VA's approach, entire populations of veterans will continue to experience structural exclusion that will result in the continued disparities. Our communities deserve to meaningfully access the resource and care they deserve and were promised. This will require taking our needs into account at every stage of veteran care. The first step requires a more thorough understanding of our minority veteran population. We must invest in studies that are designed to explicitly identify barriers that exist at the intersections of various facets of identity. While there are many research areas that deserve attention, we recommend pursuing projects that address matters such as equitable access to healthcare and benefits, particularly for women of color and LGBTQ women, and those that seek to understand necessary reparation for past harms. Recognition of diversity has often entailed explicit awareness campaigns for educational and anti-stigma purposes. Yet, as many minority veterans know all too well, visibility is not synonymous with equity. Many awareness campaigns are performative in nature and become ineffective as a result. Within VA, we've witnessed a lack of structural change brought about by campaigns that center military sexual trauma, mental health, and minority identities. Despite these efforts, campaigns are often interpreted as substitutes for real change, particularly when the issues they seek to address continue unabated. For example, the juxtaposition of MST awareness campaigns and the blatant gaslighting, victim blaming, and attempts to discredit survivors of sexual assault on VA facility grounds in the national media by Secretary Wilkie has brought into relief the widening gap that between the VA's intent and its impact. With survivors afraid to report sexual harm due to disbelief, indifference, or retaliation, it's clear that sexual harassment and assault presents the biggest disparity in care that cannot be addressed through performative campaigns. Finally, COVID-19 has severely impacted the minority veteran community economically. With an unemployment rate that nearly quadrupled in 5 months, rising food and transportation insecurity, eviction moratoriums that will soon end, and more, minority veterans are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic itself and all of its after effects. Since the beginning of the pandemic, MBA has seen over 1,400 relief applications, issuing over $50,000 in direct financial support to the community. Of these applications, 82% were from people of color and over half were from Black veterans and family members. In our work today, we should be forecasting the communities most impacted by this pandemic and preemptively support their needs to stabilize our community for the generations to come. We concur with the committee's report to expand education benefits and recommend increasing the BH stipend for online education programs to be equal to that of a full month's pay, and that those education benefits provide childcare stipends for low-income veterans. Additionally, VA should provide a provision of no-cost technology and internet vouchers for all low-income veterans as telehealth emerges as VA's preferred physical and mental health delivery system. Advancing comprehensive and equitable protections for women veterans requires that we examine the structural inequities of those women veterans and commit to addressing them. Thank you again for the opportunity to submit this testimony, and I look forward to your questions.
And I hope I'm getting it right this time. So welcome, and I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Brownlee, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the task force and committee. Paralyzed Veterans of America would like to thank you for the opportunity to submit our views on the 2020 report of the Department of Veterans Affairs Advisory Committee on Women Veterans, or ACWV. Our written comments cover multiple ways to enhance the care of women veterans with spinal cord injuries and disorders, or SCID. My remarks today will focus on 4 of our recommendations, as well as mental health and additional representation on the committee. First, we agree with ACWV's recommendation that VA should establish a plan for projecting future demand and capacity requirements that would enable the department to meet the anticipated needs of women veterans in VA facilities. As the number of women veterans who utilize VA's system of care increases, there is a pressing need to guarantee the availability and quality of the care provided. PVA women veterans report that they are generally satisfied with the care they receive within VA's SCI system of care. However, there is a persistent lack of coordination of care when a woman veteran must utilize care outside of the SCID system in the local community or other sections of the VA healthcare system. The need for good coordination of healthcare for women veterans with SCID is imperative. Second, aligning with the ACWV's recommendation that VA establish a national strategic plan for breast imaging services, the Veterans Health Administration reported that VA's Office of Radiology and the Women's Health Services are developing a strategic plan that addresses the existing and evolving needs of women veterans. Annual health evaluations are extremely important for women veterans with SCID. They help identify problems early and prevent serious health issues that are costly and difficult to treat. PVA hopes that as this strategic plan is developed, they will incorporate the provision of SCID competent services, staffing, and equipment to ensure this plan meets the needs of our women veterans. Third, chronic pain is something many of our members live with, both men and women. In line with ACWV's recommendation, we believe that there needs to be increased collaboration within VHA to ensure the unique needs of women veterans with SCID are included in provider training and research, and that the SCI system of care is assessing and meeting the specific chronic pain needs of women veterans with SCID. For example, SCI providers are not trained specifically on women's needs. Thus, collaboration between women's health services and SCID providers is necessary to ensure the right care with the best possible outcomes is provided to the veteran. Fourth, harassment has no place within the walls of a VA facility, and yet it continues to be a barrier of care for veterans. The ACWV recommended that VHA assess its End Harassment campaign to ascertain its effectiveness and to devise a plan for modernization of the effort to resolve the ongoing problem of sexual assault and harassment against women veterans in VA facilities moving forward. We ask that the newly formed Assault and Harassment Prevention Office develop policies that ensure veterans with catastrophic injuries and disorders are protected from harassment and assault at VA facilities. While not a recommendation of the committee, we feel it is important to discuss the need for mental health research among women veterans with SCID. Many of the mental health issues women veterans face, such as suicide, depression, and substance use disorder, are also present among women veterans with SCID. But women with SCID have increased rates of anxiety, which, due to the nature of their injuries, may not manifest itself in a way that is readily identifiable. Since inpatient care is often a part of substance use disorder treatment, and VA's ability to provide inpatient mental health care for veterans with SCID is inconsistent, PVA also recommends VHA assess their architectural equipment and staffing capabilities to ensure how well the VA is able to meet the inpatient needs of catastrophically disabled veterans. To better serve the mental health needs of women veterans with SCID, we need research that incorporates gender differences to give us a better understanding of the differing mental health care needs for individuals with catastrophic injuries or illnesses. Finally, PVA believes Congress should require that one position on the ACWV be filled by a woman veteran with a catastrophic disability. Many veterans with SCID receive their care in the Spoken Hub system of VA's SCI system of care, so it is extremely important that voices like theirs be represented. We would also suggest VA assess what other minority groups should be represented on the ACWV, including women of color. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on the recommendations of the ACWV. Because care for women veterans with SCID is complex and requires thorough knowledge of the complete picture of care being provided, there are always actions VA can take to improve the experience of these veterans. We look forward to working with the task force on ways to further improve care and benefits for women veterans. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Elias, and I appreciate it. And finally, I now recognize Ms. Elam for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the Women Veterans Task Force. Thank you for inviting DAV to participate in this roundtable discussion on the 2020 report of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans. I want to thank the task force for the significant contribution it's made during this Congress to better understand the unique needs of women veterans and put forth legislation to improve VA programs and services for this population. DAV also wants to acknowledge and thank the members of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans for their thoughtful and deliberative work and recommendations. The committee contributes greatly to our ability to understand the impact of military service on women, their transition and healthcare needs, assets and deficits in VA programs, along with recommendations to tailor services to address their unique needs. The advisory committee recommended to increase the number of designated women's health providers to improve access and to better project future demands and capacity for providing care to women in VA rather than in the community when possible. Many women veterans have complex health histories and specialized needs that are best served by VA's whole health model of care and comprehensive services. VA should determine locations where it currently has enough demand to provide gender-specific care to women in-house. We urge the task force to remain focused on ensuring women veterans who receive part of their care in the community have access to high-quality, coordinated care and that VA tracks their health outcomes. The advisory committee also recommended VA create a national strategic plan to improve women's care for breast health and to better project future needs for these critical services. While VA is still working to increase the number of sites with in-house mammography services, VA was pleased to learn of the recent creation of the National Women Veterans Oncology System of Excellence that will provide improved access to state-of-the-art cancer care and clinical trials for women patients. DAV recommends that VA ensure there are mammography coordinators at all women's health clinics, particularly those that are highly reliant upon community care, to ensure appropriate coordination of services and follow-on care. Another issue highlighted by the advisory committee is the need to improve pain management services for women. More than 63% of women veterans using VA care have a service-connected disability. Research found that women veterans report higher rates of pain, poor satisfaction with pain treatment, and decreased maintenance of pain treatment gains when compared to men. DAV concurs with the recommendations for VA to increase gender-specific pain management training for providers and women veterans access to more effective and diverse treatment options for co-occurring chronic pain and substance abuse disorders. A final recommendation from the advisory committee in its 2020 report called for VA to conduct an assessment of its anti-harassment campaign to ascertain its effectiveness in bringing about needed culture change within the department. Researchers identified that 1 in 4 women reported experiencing sexual harassment when trying to access VA care. While this has been a longstanding issue and a difficult problem to address, ensuring the safety and comfort of women patients in VA environments should not be. Harassment in any form is disruptive to the overall patient experience, can negatively impact veterans' access to care, and should not be tolerated in any form or fashion. Therefore, we encourage VA to make this issue a top priority for the department and hold medical center directors accountable for ensuring a safe, welcoming, harassment-free environment for veterans in all its facilities. VA should also take this opportunity to highlight, I'd like to take this opportunity just to highlight another few issues that DAV believes are worthy of further consideration by both the task force and the advisory committee. VA research is essential to recognize and address emerging needs of women veterans using VA services and issues such as eating disorders and intimate partner violence that are on the rise. We also see the need for more gender-tailored mental health and suicide prevention services and increased use of women veteran peer support specialists. Women peer health navigators could be especially beneficial for VA's culturally diverse women veterans population, as well as minority veteran populations and those identifying as LGBTQ. In closing, while progress has been made, the committee is well aware that there is still much work to do. For these reasons, DAV is pleased that the task force will continue its important work in the 117th Congress. Madam Chair, this concludes my statement, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you or members of the task force may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Elam. And just another reminder to my colleagues that members should pause 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that all of your questions are captured. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. My first question is to Master Chief Harris. Access to safe legal abortion services is essential to women's health and central to her economic and social well-being. Every woman deserves access to and comprehensive coverage for safe abortion services in their communities, including veterans. Because of VA's ban on abortion, veterans in need of these services must seek their health care outside of the VA system, pay for their care out of pocket, and navigate the maze of state restrictions on abortion on their own. In 2016, the advisory committee recommended that VA pursue a regulatory change to provide abortions as part of the medical benefits package to align VA with what is provided by other federally funded healthcare programs, including the Department of Defense. VA concurred in principle. The advisory committee continued to follow up on this recommendation until late 2019. when VA abdicated its ability to enact a regulatory change in favor of congressional action. With the new administration inbound in 2021, the next secretary could enact this important update. We support the administration ensuring that any veteran can get abortion care no matter their circumstances, and they could really forge a new path in federal coverage by ensuring comprehensive coverage. So, Master Chief Harris, do you agree? And why do you think it's important that VA pursue such a regulatory change?
Yes, Congresswoman, I do agree that service should be afforded to our women veterans. Reproductive rights and counseling, whether it be abortion, whether it be contraception, whatever. I think that's part of women's health, frankly. So why wouldn't that be offered to her? And if that's a choice that she makes and she is a veteran, I think the VA should cover that. She shouldn't have to go out and pay for that in the community, especially if she was raped or a case of incest, or if there was a danger to her life. But regardless of those three, which are critical, I just feel that if she chooses to do so, the VA should support that decision. Because before that, the VA should also offer counseling, to show that they're supporting her, as a woman. So I definitely agree with it, and I do hope in 2021 that the 117th Congress can get that through.
Thank you so much, Master Chief. And I have a little bit more time. The advisory committee, as you well know, conducts a site visit every single year. And I was wondering if you could share some of your observations from your visits to the Chicago area in 2018 and to North Carolina in 2019, particularly regarding the inconsistencies with the role of the Women Veteran Program Manager and how leadership is addressing and responding to sexual harassment and assault.
Yes, ma'am. May I start with North Carolina?
Yes, you may.
Yes, ma'am. In North Carolina, it was really disappointing to see the leadership feel like they didn't have a problem there. And one of the things that the first thing we look at when we walk into a VA facility is to see a presence of the Woman Veteran Program Manager, a photo of her, or at least something that shows that is a facility for both men and women. And so when we talk to the Woman Veteran Program Manager there, it's an inconsistency, frankly, among many of the VA facilities that we visit, but North Carolina, where the Woman Veteran Program Manager fits in the organization, because that's important. She should have a seat at the table, so at a minimum with the Chief of Staff. And she's put in different areas to where she's not at the table. She's not getting that complete support that she needs. And as far as the leadership, we asked directly in North Carolina. We know there's the secretary has the end harassment campaign. It's very top at the priority list for him and Congress. What are you all doing for your end harassment campaign? And the answer from the leadership, they did have an interim director, but still the leadership, the answer, we don't have a problem. So they didn't have any program.
Oh dear.
So they didn't have anything. And so when we had a town hall later that evening, the committee can only observe the town hall, because that really is an opportunity for the women veterans to talk directly with the leadership. And I beg to differ with the leadership after hearing those women veterans that there's a problem. There's not a problem, because clearly there is some attention that is needed there.
Master Chief, I'm sorry, but my time is, I've gone way over my time. And I appreciate your answer, and I hope we can get back to Chicago, within today's hearing roundtable. And I just have to say too that part of the Women's Task Force traveling across the country, we hear similar inconsistencies around this position, particularly, but around sexual harassment, assault, inconsistencies between, what the service members are saying and what the leadership is saying. So it's clearly an issue that we still have a lot of work yet to do. So thank you for that. I apologize for going over my time, and I now recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, first of all, thank all of you all for participating. You won't be surprised that I quite vehemently disagree with the abortion stance, being an OBGYN doctor for many years. So I'm not going to go there. That'll be discussed in the future. We'll just respectfully disagree there. But what I would like to do is to, I took some notes while you all were presenting, and it seemed to me like there was a fairly consistent theme. And one of the things that I think we can do going forward, in the Mission Act, we put the Air Commission in. And what I heard consistently was personnel and not having adequate facilities. Certainly, it's much better than it was 10 years ago. There's no question about that. I've traveled across the country and have seen vast improvements. So I think we're looking at that. And I think it was Master Chief may have brought this up, but I think the culture starts at DOD, to change the culture of DOD, so you don't have that all male culture that then heads off, because we know the VA started for men. I mean, most veterans, I remember when I served, I don't remember in the 2nd Infantry Division there being a single female when I was in the service in 1973 and 74. And there were in hospitals, but not in the infantry division. So I think we can look at having adequate personnel. If you don't have the place to see people and you don't have the folks to see them, they're not going to be very happy. And what I've heard you all say is that our women veterans are having a better experience at VA than they used to have. So there have been changes. The second thing I heard you all say was very near and dear to my heart, because our practice saw just one medical practice saw over 50 breast cancers a year, every year in our one single practice. The VA should have a center of excellence across the country. And now with telehealth and all of that on breast care, it should absolutely be the shining star for the country. And that should be fairly easy to do. I think with the next administration, we as a committee should lean on the VA to provide those services, because you now digitally can have your mammogram read anywhere in the world, literally overnight. So there's no reason that access to care shouldn't be there for the best, and we have the resources to provide those for every woman veteran. Another part that's a little tougher, because several friends who do this, is pain management. That's a very hard specialty to find, I can tell you. One of my best friends runs a very large pain management clinic, 5 providers, which is a big one in our area, and it's very, very difficult to recruit those providers. And I think from a substance abuse standpoint, that also creates challenges. And I know the chairman, I want to thank him for his work on suicide prevention. We just experienced one of my senior pastors at where I go to church committed suicide last week. So very near and dear to my heart to be able to do that. So I think when we take the Air Commission, we've got a real chance. You all have an opportunity to make an input into this, to make some real changes. And I would welcome, if I serve on the Air Commission, your input, because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to reorganize how the VA looks and how it provides services. So with that, Master Chief, I'll just kick it over to you and hear what your comments are.
Yes, sir. I agree with everything you just said. If you don't mind, I would like to defer to my colleague, Dr. Lisa Kirk, who's worked very diligently on that recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we agree with you, Dr. Rowe, on the fact that we need definitely a strategic plan for breast imaging. And we do know that all the mammography is digital now and capable of being transmitted very quickly from the community. However, we do see lots of evidence from women that there's not a continuity in their care. So the transfer of information hasn't quite got there yet. And I'm sure you've heard some of the stories yourself. So we're diligently working towards that, and we were pleased with what the VA concurred with our recommendation. First of all, they concurred with it. They did put out a very good timeline for what their actions will be, and we're going to keep following up with them. This AIR Commission, we'd love to be involved with that if you do become involved with it, and we just defer to you for what we could do to help you and serve you.
Well, my time's expired, but I think it would be, I think one of the biggest impacts you could have from women's health, obviously an inordinate number of women develop breast cancer. The survival rates have never been higher. But I saw it when I started my practice, the survival rate for breast cancer for women was 50% in 5 years. Today, it's up to above 95%. And we should shoot for almost eliminating that. And I think the VA could be a model for the country about how it's done. My time's expired, Madam Chairman. I'm sorry for running over. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. And I was writing down your thoughts in terms of, work that can be done next year. So I appreciate that, and may call on you next year when back in Tennessee to get a little bit more insight into your concepts there. So next, I call on the Chairman Takano, for questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Brownlee. And I saw you writing down those notes, and I was listening very attentively to what Dr. Rowe had to say, his suggestions. So thank you, Dr. Rowe, for the marching orders for next year. I want to start with Master Chief Harris. The advisory committee conducts one site visit a year. Please share some of your observations from your visits to the Chicagoland area in 2018 and North Carolina in 2019, particularly regarding inconsistencies with the role of the Women Veteran Program Manager and how leadership address preventing and responding to sexual harassment and assault.
Yes, Congressman. As far as Chicago site visit, there were inconsistencies in the facilities that we visited there. Each one had a Women Veteran Program Manager, but the problem was not each of them were assigned full-time. She was also a nurse, so she had to keep up with her clinicals. So that's what I meant about, ensuring that Women Veteran Program Manager is aligned somewhere in the organization where she has a seat at the table and can be supported 100% by the leadership. And so there was inconsistencies there. And as far as the end harassment campaign was non-existent in North Carolina. And we just see inconsistencies with the Women Veteran Program managers where they are aligned, and some of them seem overwhelmed. So there could be a way that you could have 2 Women Veteran Program managers for the number of women veterans. Does that answer your question, sir?
It does. I mean, so if we're going to say that we want to change the culture at VA, we want to provide women veterans with greater safety and greater access, we have to back it up with actually not just saying we want to do it. We have to staff it up. We can't have people like wearing 2 or 3 hats. That's what I hear you saying.
Yes, sir. That's correct. And I know the VA is aware of that. To what extent they think that should be changed, I'm not sure. I can't speak for them, but we certainly see that many of them are overwhelmed and not supported.
How has the Advisory Committee on Women's Veterans taken an intersectional approach to the needs of women, of minority women veterans, including LGBTQ women veterans? What obstacles and opportunities have you observed?
Well, some of the obstacles have been not having programs stood up across the board. And I know that the VA is now recognizing different programs to support those communities and those, populations. So that's something that is progressing, but still needs work.
Great, thank you. For Colonel Yarborough, what is the outlook on the future of work of the VA Advisory Committee for the next 2 years?
Yes, sir. Some of the things that we're looking at to make sure that the advisory committee remains relevant and that we can continue to help the VA improve the services that they provide to women veterans is that we become more active, more interactive with the population that we're charged to ensure support of. In other words, we want to get out and actually interact with the women veterans population, in addition to interacting with our VA personnel and facilities.
Colonel, what would you like to see the Women Veterans Task Force undertake in the 117th Congress? If you can add to what Dr. Rose already given us to do.
Thank you, sir. One of the things that is near and dear to my heart and my passion being a woman veteran is to make sure that the VA facilities are more welcoming to our women veterans. We did some recommendations on ensuring that consideration is given to women veterans when they're naming the facilities. I've never gone into a VA facility that reflects a name that I could possibly have known or served with, or look at and say, that could have been me. So it's a cultural shift that needs to happen. And that's one of the things we need to work on.
Well, thank you. My time is up, and I want to be respectful of others that want to interact with the witnesses. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I now recognize General Bergman for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, everybody. I don't have to tell you all, I can sense in your presentations your commitment at all levels, whether you be members of the panel, members, colleagues in Congress, because we are a military that wants and needs to value, men and women to serve, because that's how we defend ourselves. So thank you all for your commitment to that service after service. I'd like to ask Command Master Chief Harris, in response to the advisory committee's recommendation, number 5, that quote, the Veterans Health Administration, the VHA, incentivize VA healthcare providers to become designated women's health providers to improve access to care for women veterans. The VA did not concur with that, noting that there is no, quote, legal mechanism available to award pay increases, end quote. What are some other ways in women's health and other areas at the VA that we could possibly incentivize positive practices? Because incentivization doesn't necessarily always mean money. But any thoughts on that, Master Chief?
Yes, sir. And that's a great question. The reason why we even brought it up is because so many women veterans, when we go out in the field, don't feel comfortable, particularly going, for their care because there's not a provider that has any background knowledge of women's health whatsoever. And I know the VA had a program where they trained some providers in women's health for the VA, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come back to the VA. So we run into this problem where we see that what can the VA do to get providers that have women's health expertise to stay in the VA? And I think, whether it be, if it's not monetary, definitely give them the facilities, because a lot of times it's the facilities.
Well, not to, I know my time's running here, not to interrupt, but, I was thinking as you were talking, maybe there's an opportunity here. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And that's a positive thing. That's not a negative thing. That's a good thing. To solve a problem, maybe we should consider what we did with providing some grant money to non-VA healthcare providers that are currently not in the system who maybe have some expertise in women's health, because we did that as we began to attack the veteran suicide issue. But we'll leave that for another time. To the panel, if anybody would like to comment on this, in its efforts to better address veterans' mental health challenges, the VA has begun to take key steps, such as through the Solid Start program that contacts newly transitioning service members within their first year after leaving active duty, and to address specific transition needs. So when a trained VA employee is contacting these new veterans, what type of tailored information should women's veterans be receiving that they may or may not be informed about currently? What do you think?
I think they should be aware of where to enroll in the VA. I think they should be aware of who to seek out, the Woman Veteran Program Manager, because part of her role is to help that woman veteran navigate the system, because it can be very overwhelming to walk into a VA facility and not feel welcomed, per se. So I think those are two fundamental things that they should know. And I know that there is a program on the DoD side in conjunction with the VA.
Yeah, and I guess I would associate myself with Dr. Rowe's comments about really this needs to start back within the DoD, because that's where it starts. To just think of going from DoD service down into an abyss and then having to climb out into the VA, that should be started way back there. So with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you so much for all your efforts, and Merry Christmas to everybody, in case I don't get a chance to say that before we end this.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, General Bergman. I now recognize Mr. Levin for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Brownlee, for your great leadership, and thank you all for your testimony. Chairwoman Harris, I wanted to thank you for your service leading on the advisory committee for the last 2 years. And Colonel Yarborough, well, I know you've been on the advisory committee for a few years now. I wanted to welcome you as the incoming chair. Before I dive into some of the specific recommendations in the report, I want to acknowledge the fact that much of the great work that you did in preparing it was conducted before the COVID-19 pandemic really took hold. And obviously that's impacted women veterans' physical and mental health, their employment, their education, their childcare, pretty much everything. So Chairwoman Harris, what additional recommendations might you put forth related to the impact of COVID-19 on women veterans if you were submitting this report today?
I would put a recommendation that the VA needs to have a task force specifically looking at homelessness. I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of homelessness, higher than what there is for women veterans, and make sure that those programs that are already in place, outreach them, because the veterans aren't going to be able to come to the facilities. A lot of VA facilities aren't accepting veterans right now anyway, because the COVID patient count is so high. So I would say that a task force to go out, find these veterans and find out what their needs are. And there's a way to do that, especially if you form a group that specifically does that. And it will be a group from VHA, VBA.
No, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
No, sir, that was it.
Well, I think there's a great deal of interest in continuing the discussion outside the context of these 5 minutes. So we'll definitely need to do that. And Chair Brownlee will have to take that one offline. I was moved by a number of the recommendations. One of them was the inclusionary branding of VA facilities to honor women veterans. And what we are doing in our district in San Diego is we created a VA facility dedication advisory panel to recommend notable women veterans with ties to the San Diego region to name one of our local VA facilities after them. And we've got just a great group of local veterans that are engaged in this now. We announced the panel last month, and the hope is we'll get a report from them by Memorial Day with at least a few good recommendations, and then we're going to try to introduce legislation based on those recommendations. And the panel is in the process right now of developing the criteria that they're going to use to evaluate the nominees. So my question for all of our roundtable participants is, what criteria do you think are the most important? Do you think that we should prioritize in selecting an individual to honor with the name of one of our VA facilities in San Diego?
I'll go ahead and start. And sir, I'd like to thank you. We did hear that you started that group, and San Diego was my last duty station. So great. I was really happy. Yeah, I was really happy to hear about that. I think one of the criteria would be the significant contributions that have gone unnoticed so many years that have come to the surface recently. There's so many people who don't know who Dr. Mary Walker was. She is still the only woman who has received the Medal of Honor.
Wow. Wow. Anybody else want to weigh in on the criteria? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. It's a great question. I agree with Commander Harris's suggestions, but I also think wherever possible, we want to try to incorporate as many intersections as possible, such as race, disability status, LGBTQ status, so we get a more representative sample. And also, if I could really quick to your COVID-19 and women veterans, the VA is still not even reporting how many women veterans have died. They aren't reporting by gender COVID-19 statistics. So that would be a great first step in that solution forward too.
That is an excellent suggestion. Well, I just have a few seconds left, Chair Brownlee, but one last question for Chairwoman Harris, which is that the fifth recommendation is for VA to incentivize healthcare providers to participate in training to become designated women's health providers. And the response from VA noted there's no legal mechanism to award pay increases as an incentive, since women's health providers don't have a specific medical board specialty or official clinical specialty. So my time, and I'm out of time, but the last question is, should Congress provide the VA the authority to award those pay increases to women health providers? And what other incentives would you suggest that VA offer to women's health providers in the absence of such legislation?
Yes, sir. I would definitely hope that there could be legislation that could support. That would definitely be a start. And Dr. Kirk, would you have a quick one?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, sir. When we wrote that recommendation 5, we wrote incentive to be very inclusive of not just money. We thought they could think of other things. We had thought of awards and time off and all kinds of things in our little working group when we were writing the recommendation. We boiled it down to incentive. So we would very much support a congressional legal language that supports financial incentives. I think that's going to help more than anything. But we also want the VA to think of other incentives. It's a pleasure to work with women, in my experience, and doing the things in the VA hospitals that are beautiful and make the facilities more beautiful for women, make them more beautiful for men. And we've said that many times at many facilities, on many site visits. We want it to be a nicer environment for everyone. And we think men are married to women and they like how their homes look. So we feel like it would be a good thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for your leadership, Chair Brownlee, and happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. And I now recognize Ms. Underwood for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate listening to this roundtable today. One of my areas of focus in Congress has been ending the Black maternal mortality crisis. We introduced the Protecting Moms Who Served Act in the 116th Congress, but just wondering, and this is for anyone who wants to jump in, if you heard anything during the survey about pregnant women, postpartum women, any outstanding needs or recommendations that you'd like to offer. Anybody want to jump in?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go ahead and jump in. I haven't from the survey, ma'am, but I think the VA could, again, be a good model and have a benchmark on helping these women in terms of postpartum. I know right now there are minimal programs for women, women minorities, all women postpartum. But I think reaching that population, which tends to feel left out on a lot of levels, that would be great, because there's some, the VA doesn't deliver the babies, but I think if they strengthen the pre and post, that would be great.
Thank you. I know there's someone else that wanted to jump in too.
Hi, this is Lindsay. Oh,
okay, yeah,
go ahead, Joy.
No, you go ahead.
This is Lindsay from Minority Veterans of America. I think the greatest thing, I'm going to go back to the abortion issue and the access to abortion and continuing to make inroads towards being able to offer those through VA care. We recognize that the greatest disparities when it comes to abortion access is around economics, around socioeconomics, and being able to access that care. That we've also recognized that those folks who are the greatest economically disadvantaged are more likely to bear the burden of poverty as due to an unplanned pregnancy. So we have to be talking about that and continuing to recognize that there are greater barriers and access issues around specifically women of color being able to access abortion services and continue to plan their families according to the greatest needs that they have.
Thank you. And was it Joy who wanted to chime in as well?
I just wanted to add, I think peer specialists could really add to this for some women veterans who really need that additional support and may not have it available to them. And it would keep that connection with VA during the pregnancy. And even though they may be, being seen in the community for their care but post-delivery as well, just as a follow-up. And, I think women appreciate those connections and want to maintain that connection with another woman veteran who may have had the same experience as her.
Fantastic, thank you. And then just listening to the conversation, I appreciated the testimony from the Minority Veterans Association, wondering if Lindsay Church had anything else she wanted to add to the conversation.
Thank you so much for the question. I think the greatest things that we didn't really touch on nearly as much is continuing. I think we want to see more around coronavirus pandemic relief. We recognize that the pandemic was sort of new when it came to writing this report, but the greatest thing that we see missing from this report is talking about the effects of the pandemic on the women veteran community, and specifically on minority women veteran communities, because we've seen a rise in essential workers within the women of color population. They can't get away from being exposed to the pandemic, which also means that there's a higher rate of contracting the virus, as well as the impacts and socioeconomics behind that. So this pandemic is not just today, and it's not just tomorrow, and it's not just when the vaccine happens. It's going to be impacting this community for years and years to come. So I think the greatest thing that we need to be focused on right now, how do we stop the windfall of economic and socioeconomic barriers to minority veterans after the pandemic?
That's the question. Thank you all so much for your testimony today and for your hard work. Take good care of yourselves, everybody. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. And I'm going to go for another round of questions. And if any other members want to ask more questions, you are certainly welcome to. But I don't think we've focused in on the VSOs enough to hear from them on this topic. And so I wanted to ask all of the VSOs really a couple of different questions. And that is, the first is around, sexual assault and violence and the prevention of that, and the efforts taking place, in my opinion, cannot succeed without the collaboration of VSOs. And the VA briefed the committee that their ongoing efforts to end sexual harassment and assault included VSO input. So how is VA engaged with your organizations on this rollout? And do you think you've been fully engaged? Do you think it's enough? We want to hear your feedback.
Well, I can go ahead and start. Initially, they've informed us about their program, and we've had, some ability to, talk to them, but I certainly feel like there could be a lot more engagement with the leadership of each of the veteran service organization. For example, our national commander has indicated and done a number of social media related discussions with our membership to say we all need to be part of the solution for this. So we've made that clear to VHA that we definitely want to have more collaboration. And how are they going to bring in? I know right now they're doing the training for their own employees on interventions, but how are they going to bring in the community, which is the largest community using the VA healthcare system, and the problems that exist? So I think they're not tapping that resource nearly enough, and that's going to be instrumental in changing culture, and also being able to have some real feedback loops with veterans who use VA and their experiences, so that they can address the targeted issues at each facility, and have that connection with a medical center director and the responsibility for ensuring a harassment-free environment.
Ms. George?
Excuse me, I'm looking for the mute button. So far, we have yet to actually hear from the VA on anything having to do with sexual assault, harassment, or prevention. We, as an organization, are far more likely to encounter Secretary Wilkie harassing our members in the media than we are to actually hear measurable changes or any type of action plans for being able to curb the sexual assault and harassment pandemic at VA.
Ms. Elias.
Thank you for that question, Chairwoman Brownlee. When I first came on board to PV, I actually had a nice hour-long conversation with Lila Jackson, who's running a lot of that work over there. But then when the pandemic hit, it kind of fell off the radar. Since then, communication from that office has been more talking at us than talking with us. We're working to try to make that more of a collaborative communication, but I think Joy's comments really hit the nail on the head. We really need to involve our VSO leadership if we want to affect change, because it's going to come from both sides of these houses here, so to speak.
Thank you. And, in terms of, trying to drill down further and better serve our minority women veterans and our LGBTQ community, what do you think is the best way that we can approach this so that we sort of have a laser sharp focus on this? Because I feel like it's needed. Would a standalone committee focusing in on these issues be helpful, or a subcommittee of the whole focusing in on these issues? What are your recommendations?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. I am absolutely in agreement that I think that there needs to be a holistic focus on minority veterans. What we recognize in our work, which we do our work through an intersectional movement building lens, we recognize that most minority veterans that we see are not holding one identity or one minority identity, they're holding multiple. And I think it's really important to recognizing those intersectional pieces, much to the point where we talk about women veterans of color and the greatest disparities that they face. We recognize that not all things are built the same. So we have to be looking at that nuance, but we also have to be looking at this intersectionally. We know that women, veterans of color, LGBTQ women face different and greater disparities than white women or men of color. So I think it's really important to make sure that we actually branch all of those together so that we have a holistic view of the actual community as it stands, recognizing that the future community looks like us. Thank you. And also, it's almost Hanukkah tomorrow, so thank you to anybody. Happy Hanukkah to anybody that celebrates.
Very good. Ms. Elias or Ms.
I would just add one thing. I think the Veterans Experience Office that did a very good job at talking and having actual feedback and work groups with women veterans directly to inform their guide, where they were really looking at where were the barriers, where were the problems for women veterans who were trying to utilize the system to try and improve their care. They should definitely engage a group of users of the system and to help with this problem as well.
I think too, I'd like to add to that, when we talk about intersections, I always want to put in there that disability is also considered a protected minority status. And so that should be a part of the discussion. But also, we talk about veteran-to-veteran harassment, but for our members who, especially those in long-term care facilities that are completely reliant upon their VA caregivers, many can be reluctant to report assault or harassment from the employee side because that could result in, people coming later to take care of them or some sort of repercussion that's a microaggression, or they're a little more scared to report. So as we continue to work on this progress, and I think a subcommittee is a great idea, we want to look at both sides of the house to make sure we're getting that full picture, and also looking at the SCI system of care, and if that experience is different for women veterans than those in the VA care system.
Terrific. And the last question I really wanted to ask the VSOs is, what does the future look like? What do you think this committee should be, focused on in the 117th Congress?
I think
go ahead, Joy. Sorry.
I think one issue that's going to be really paramount in the upcoming Congress, just as we see now the VA as it's really getting together its veterans community care networks. And we know women disproportionately have to use care in the community because service may not be available at VA. But we really want to make sure that the quality is being monitored of those providers, especially if they're providing specialty services. And I know the Women's Health Program Office was trying to do one-pagers to make sure that they were, giving these network providers additional information about women patients who they may see. But they should also be required to have the same training standards as providers in VA and meet those. And VA should be tracking their outcomes. So that's going to be, I think, really important just to maintain that quality of care for women throughout their VA experience.
Anybody else?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So a couple of things that I think the committee should be looking at the 117th. First and foremost, economic prosperity, recognizing that women, minorities, we often earn less than our white male counterparts. So there is a barrier and disparity there that we should be looking to address and find economic empowerment programs for minority and women veterans. We also need to be looking at intersectional research and making sure that we're doing the research. Right now, we don't collect LGBTQ data, and I think that's a really big gap in our understanding of who our veterans are. So we don't know how many LGBTQ women veterans that we do actually have in our community. I also think that the VA needs to take a policy not of awareness on sexual assault, but on sexual assault eradication. It needs to be a commitment to eradicating it from the system and continuing to hold people accountable. Last, I think focusing on women in the margins. So looking at women who are experiencing homelessness, incarcerated women veterans, women who are struggling with substance abuse, domestic violence survivors, those folks that are in the margins that we can serve better, and recognize that when we do, we will serve everyone better.
Great.
And then I think, I second what Lindsay said about research. That's something that we have been talking about consistently this year, about the need for research among women veterans with SCID. I think also taking a look onto the VBA side of the house and how well they're serving our women veterans, because a lot of those are socioeconomic or social determinants of health and can really have an impact on their experience And then also, a number one priority for us is going to be getting IVF services permanently funded and authorized. So there's no longer this have to wait for it to be reauthorized every year stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you all the way. Ms. Church, I don't know if you referenced, in your testimony, you highlighted research. You want to just speak about that for just a minute?
Absolutely. On the subject matter or the subject of research, there are huge gaps when it comes to our understanding and our knowledge. VA collects a ton of information and data. Oftentimes, it's an issue of processing, though. Most of the time, the information comes as an aggregated, condensed whole, and we don't actually have the ability to use that information to better arm us to serve or to create new programs. So some of this actually needs to be not just in the collection, but also in the data processing, to be looking at these unique and actually identifying what markers we're trying to look for. I think one of the biggest things, like we talked about and I've said several times, women veterans of color. We need to be looking at all of the reports that we put out when it comes to minority veterans and when it comes to women veterans should both include in both of those places. It should include that information disaggregated by gender, by LGBTQ status, by race, by ethnicity, and really digging into the minutia, because that's actually going to be what sets VA apart in the future, is really understanding the community that they seek to serve and creating those nuanced programs and those nuanced approaches and creating those nuanced policy positions that are going to change the whole system as we know it. So really just digging into that intersectional data and pulling more pieces out to help us better build this system in an equitable way.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm sure the committee is listening to all of the VSO's recommendations in terms of looking ahead and what needs to be done. And I, just want to really thank all of you for being here today. This is, I think, a perfect way to end the 116th Congress and a great way to open up the 117th Congress, understanding that, to recognize some of the accomplishments that have been done and recognizing the work ahead. And I certainly want to thank Master Chief Harris for your leadership over the last year. Has it just been a year or has it been 2 years?
As chairman, 2 years.
2
on the
years.
committee 4.
Very good. And I want to congratulate Colonel Yarborough for taking the helm, and look forward, really working with you next year, with all of you, because you'll all be here. And but I'm really very grateful to the work that you do. And I have to say, your testimony, your honesty in your testimony, and your recognition of what we've accomplished and what we need to do, I just appreciate very, very much, because I have to just say, many times when the VA comes to testify, I feel like they're not, admitting to some of the shortcomings, and I think you can't really deal with those issues until you admit them and put them on the table. And so I really do appreciate your candidness and honesty around that. So I'm just grateful to the dedication of everyone on the panel for your work in our common goal of achieving equity for our women veterans. And I also want to thank all of my colleagues on the task force for their support. We've seen a lot of changes, and we've been advocating for a lot of things over many decades, and we're starting to see some progress. And I think we have highlighted the work that we need to do in the 117th. And I think with the new Congress and a new administration, I think there's a lot of hope. I think there'll be a renewed focus and effort in ensuring access to gender-specific care. As the growth of women veterans will continue to increase and climb, and the elimination That's what we have to focus on, the elimination, zero tolerance, no more sexual harassment and assault at the VA. And so I think Master Chief Harris mentioned early on, and I'll close with a quote from Dr. Mary Edwards Walker of Oswego, New York, the first and only woman to receive the Medal of Honor. The Civil War veteran reminded us all by saying, and I quote, let the generations know that women in uniform also guaranteed our freedom, end quote. So I appreciate all of you, and I thank you for being here again today, and have a safe, healthy, and joyful, I hope it can be joyful holiday during this, during COVID. Hopefully this is our only one time, one Thanksgiving, one holiday season under the circumstances we are under. And happy Hanukkah for all of those who celebrate. And I will now say this roundtable is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Brownlee, if I could just add one thing, and I think we would just be remiss without thanking you and Andrea and the work of your staff. For someone who's been testifying on these issues for over 2 decades, in this last Congress, we've seen more progress just because of the continued work and the roundtables that you've held and the work of the task force, the volume of legislation that's been introduced, meaningful legislation, and we couldn't have done that without this attention. And I think that's important to keep that pressure up, because it used to be we would have one hearing every 2 years, so on women veterans issues. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It really is a labor of love for me, and it wouldn't happen without Andrea, and she's just been, as you all know, really just extraordinary. And Andrea, I'll give you the floor if you'd like to say some parting words before we reconvene in the 117th.
Oh, thank you, ma'am, and thank you for the birthday wishes early on. Ma'am, thank you for this opportunity. I joined the task force as a staff member almost 2 years ago, and it's been the job of a lifetime. Many of you know the story that I begged my mother to take me to the Library of Congress on spring break in 8th grade to learn about women who disguised themselves as men to fight in the Civil War, and now get to use that knowledge to work with all of you.
And to name a bill.
What's that, ma'am?
And to name a bill.
Yes, and to name a bill. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. This is absolutely a team effort, and I'm honored to serve with all of you and have a joyful and restful holiday season.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Take good care. Be safe.
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.